Welcome to Becoming Lissarette. This is not a podcast about optimization. It is not about healing, and it is not about becoming your best self. It's about what happens when the identity you've spent your entire adult life constructing quietly, respectively, and impressively begins to disintegrate, while everyone around you continues to congratulate you for it. My name is Dr. Lissarette Nisnievich. I'm a developmental psychologist. I'm the mother of a neurodivergent child. I've built and sold companies. I've been married for almost a decade. And recently, I began to suspect that the life I had constructed was no longer one I could ethically inhabit. Arrival is a myth. We are taught to believe that adulthood has a destination, that there is a point where, your relationship stabilized, right? Or that your career becomes meaningful, or, gosh, your family resembles the one that you imagined, or that your body begins to feel like home again. But development doesn't end at 18 or 25 or when you become a mother. In fact, many of the most significant reorganizations of identity occur in what should be the most stable periods of adult life. Because once the striving stops, you finally have the psychological space to notice that you're profoundly unhappy. And there is nothing dramatic enough to explain why. There is a kind of grief that has no socially acceptable container. You can grieve a marriage that hasn't ended, a career that still functions, a version of motherhood that never materialized. I've seen very dear family members go. My grandmother, who was an incredible, incredible human. To this day, I've never met anyone who doesn't have a hater, and that woman had none. Everyone loved my grandmother. And I think she genuinely loved everyone back. And our social standards in life prepares us for one type of grief, which is when you're going to lose people you love. Eventually, they will age, and that will be that, and you're never really ready, but you kind of, your mind is sort of kind of getting ready for that. But the grief that I experienced that was incredibly transformational for me was the grief of my son's diagnosis. And I don't want to make this episode all about that, because that's not what this is about. It's not, oh, okay, it's about what this meant for me. I wrote a book about it because it was the best way I had to express how profoundly transforming this grief was for me. And it was a grief I was not prepared for. To cry and to be sad about the fact that the family and the motherhood experience that I had envisioned since I was a little girl was just not going to happen, just not the way that I had put that movie in my mind, which can be quite devastating. You can grieve the fact that your child will not experience the world in the way you were once told he would. Not because you don't love him, but because the imagined future that organized your entire adult life has quietly disappeared. And you're now living inside a story that nobody prepared you for. Grief is not always the result of catastrophe. Sometimes it is the result of recognition. Gosh, there are things that you're not ready to be sad about. And it's okay to be sad about them. I had to tell myself that every day, that it was okay, that I did not have to feel guilty about the things that I was sad about. I felt that if I showed those emotions in front of the people who consistently told me how amazing I was, how they couldn't believe all the things I was doing, how I was inspiring them, I couldn't possibly allow myself to be sad, right? Because people who have it all They can't be sad. They can't grieve. They have too much to be grateful for. But two things can be true at once. You can be sad and be grateful. In developmental psychology, we use the term identity foreclosure to describe what happens when an individual commits to a role before engaging in sufficient exploration of alternatives. So we are told, and there are things that are profoundly proven to work, and I respect that. But we have to be honest about that some of them are not for everyone. You become the wife because that's what you're supposed to be. That's what you're told you're supposed to want. And it's great when you do. But you become these things and base your whole life on them without exploring what else is there of me. Who haven't I allowed myself to be that feels like living? So you become the wife, you become the mother, you become the founder, the caregiver, the competent one. And over time, your life becomes less about who you are and more about how effectively you perform for the people who depend on you, for your staff, until one day you stop performing, not out of rebellion, but out of fatigue. And what remains is not freedom. What remains is not freedom, but uncertainty. Who am I if I am not? Fill the blank. And it's the realization that you never gave yourself the opportunity to explore that. Collapse is rarely cinematic. We have all these beautiful moments now on socials and this aspect of competition, who has the better life. But we don't know what's truly happening behind the scenes. And this is a conversation that continuously happens. And I hear my friends doing the unfortunate game of comparison. And it's part of the performance, the social performance of, hey, look, I'm happy. I started focusing more on actually being happy, actually being healthy, and not trying to prove to the world that I was with a photo or a video or something. That was important to me. Because again, collapse is rarely cinematic. It doesn't always look like a crisis. We're expecting this dramatic thing, and no. Sometimes it looks like you wrote your journal every day and then you stopped. Or you had this blog that you loved doing and then you just went silent. Or you stayed in a relationship that you already knew will end. Or you build a life that you cannot imagine inhabiting 10 years from now, and you know this. Collapse begins quietly. And next episode, we'll talk about what construction requires. Because after recognition, there's choice.